to distribute a cake, we had a heavy lunch. And because we have had a heavy lunch, we can't eat your cake. So you should have told us that. Others say, I don't like the cake. To eat a cake. Let those people who like cake get more, and those who don't like cake get less. Many people argue, let's go by vote. Let's do voting for distribution. Others say there is a lottery. Why not go through a lottery? What is the point of illustration and evolving on this? What is happening? You're talking of equality, but look at the way the equality is being conceptualized. Even the discussion regarding who are the recipients is being disputed. The dispute is also in terms of what is the way to distribute. The latecomers or those who are present in our distributional policies, you can reflect on this. But the point is, and the major point that I'm trying to make is that for every step in terms of policy, there is a disputation process, the social process that is comes into a dispute. Who are the participants? That comes into dispute. How do you define the distribution? So, policy is something very complex. If there is only one person to be deciding all these kinds of steps, then that person is going to take up his or her own vision in order to resolve these issues. But these are issues of contestation. So what are we having, therefore? That a policy agenda or a problem that is put on the agenda is a social construction. It is something that is constructed from your vision. And that is the reason why it is arena of contestation. So that is the arena today. If Anna Hazare is competing for a vision in society, some people disagree, some people agree, state agrees, doesn't agree. It is not an issue merely of whether it is right or wrong. The issue is of social process. What is Parliament for? Why doesn't he accept the Parliament as an institution? If it is so sure, why doesn't he go to court? It's a question of social process. How to decide it? Follow this procedure. There are formally laid procedures. Why doesn't he follow the formally laid procedures? Now, therefore, when we are talking of policy and policy agendas, then what is happening is that society defines and redefines problems. As one goes along, what does society do? It is not static. Society is not something that is static. Changes are taking place, new things are happening. It's not static. And society grows. As it goes along, society defines problems, redefines problems. Same problem that might have been decided in a different way earlier is sought to be redefined in another way because the context has changed. Now, in this defining and redefining of problems, what is the input? Knowledge, ideas, experience. So the redefinition of problems or redefining these problems comes from various sources. It is not coming from a single institution. It is not coming merely from the state. But within a democratic framework, within a pluralistic framework, this redefinition or defining of problems is coming from different sources. Sources of knowledge are different. Kinds of research that people do are very, very different. Poverty as an aspect of environmental degradation is one source of knowledge that has come up, because there is now new knowledge being created with new research and new experience with people with research or intellectual academic backgrounds have reflected upon. And why is this happening? So, society is constantly changing and redefining and defining problems. And that is what we see in India. You look at any kinds of studies, you look at whole aspect of environment, you look at whole aspect of even climate, what was thought of in terms of climate. That has all changed in several years on how we define it and how then we redefine it and change it to new things. And finally, therefore, what it means is that our understanding of policy making becomes much wider, that our understanding of how policies are crafted, how policies are determined, become much wider. We also understand that policy making is a complex process. It is not a simple process of purely technical details, but is a process of contestation. And it is this, in a democracy, it is this process of contestation which needs to be understood and looked at, the kinds of roles that other actors can provide for. And this is where I think we come to issues of what does the civil society do then? If this is our understanding, if this is our understanding of the kinds of policy process that are coming up, are emerging, where there is a wider understanding, wider inputs, contestation, where governance is of networks, where the responsibility is of bringing the three together in order to create coordination and cooperation, where does civil society come in? And I think this is, if I might say so, the civil society comes in to provide for three important kinds of roles. One, as I mentioned, one is what has been called as to inspire. But to inspire means to generate support for a particular specific action, identify problems, create new ideas, question old ideas. Now, this is where civil society provides for a new kind of an input into public discourse, into a public domain. Second, civil society provides for expert opinion, provides for research. And as I go in later, I'd like to dissuade you from the idea that civil society consists only of NGOs. Civil society also consists of research institutions. It also consists of think tanks. They are also part of the civil society, and they also have a role in fulfilling these kinds of functions. And they have a very important role in terms of providing for research in order to redefine problems. Very important role in terms of collating and making views, collating research findings into a plausible policy agenda. And finally, the civil society is also there to improve and to monitor, to evaluate programs. This is broadly what we understand of what a civil society does. Or, if I might say so, ought to be doing. But what it does, what it is expected of civil society. Now, if we are looking at this, then I would like to point out at least 2 or 3 types of civil society organizations. One is the NGOs. By and large, we do understand a civil society organization as an NGO. Let me say at this point that the concept of civil society has emerged as kind of an intermediary level between individual and the state, where the individual within the family was considered to be his private domain, his own domain. To mediate between that individual and state were coming of people together, whether to form associations or to form NGOs, etc. So the civil society organizations are really of individuals coming together to perform public goals, not for private goals. So that there are civil society organizations like an association, like a club, and they do perform a public goal. But the kinds of civil society organizations that we are interested in are those that take up negotiations with the state for purposes of policy making, etc., etc., to pursue public goals. The second type of civil society organizations, what have emerged in the last 20, 30 years, have been what have come to be known as research organizations and think tanks. If you look at the trajectory in India, in 1950s, there did occur and did develop several research institutions, but most of these research institutions were there to provide technical data and information to the Planning Commission for purposes of policy making. From late 1970s and 1980s, a diversification has taken place. Now, the research organizations and think tanks work not only to feed data into the government policies, but to articulate alternatives, articulate new ways of thinking, articulate new ideas, develop researches to develop new paradigms. Now, that has become a very different kind of a role. So, civil society organizations are performing, if I might say so, both kinds of roles. One, role of mobilization, gathering support and advocating ideas. Two, civil society organizations also provide for generating new ideas, developing alternatives. So there is a role of mobilization, there is a role of information, and there is a role of advocacy. There are these 3 kinds of roles which can be combined in a single organization, but there are these 3 important kinds of roles that one talks of today. But one kind of a major feature of civil society organizations, advocacy groups, etc., has been that, there were voluntary organizations earlier. I mean, one has this Gandhian legacy of people who are volunteers, who worked in rural areas without any payment, did voluntary work. Now that has been one kind of a conception. I think now the civil society organizations have moved away while those kinds of organizations do exist, but they have moved away to become very large organizations which has employees, or organizations that are funded by international agencies, not only national agencies but international agencies. So the scene of civil society organizations has now become much larger. Therefore, I'm merely pointing out to what I said. There are now multiplicity, different kinds, diverse sources of funding, different kinds of supports, and there is no uniform picture as far as civil society organizations, think tanks, research organizations. Because as a matter of fact, in India today, we don't even have a total number of how many NGOs exist in the country. People have gone to the extent of saying that probably 3 million. There are many more that have not been counted. So there's a tremendous diversity in the number of NGOs that exist, and there has of course been an effort by Planning Commission itself to help and support voluntary action. They have developed in 2007 a national voluntary policy, but that policy has been under great discussion. But in any case, the point that I'm trying to make, there is no uniform kind of a picture that is available of these think tanks or otherwise. But NGO, I think, has become, as I said, extremely important in terms of mobilizing support. And the kind of method that NGOs have used to mobilize support, to create ideas, to present ideas, to put it into public domain. And one kind of a thing that I would point out is that one method that has been used and widely accepted today has that been of what is now called as Jan Sunwais. Most mobilization has come through getting people's support through Jan Sunwais, where people come together, and this method has been used in various kinds of mobilizational efforts that have gone on. Very briefly, let us look at some of these campaigns that have been undertaken by civil society organizations in India, which have led to policy changes, which have led to policy determination of a different kind, or expedited policies. Whether, I don't need to go into detail, but food security bill that we are continuing to discuss, that has been something on the civil society agenda from 2001. Lots of changes have occurred in that. People have worked on that. Right to employment, right to education, right to information. The campaign for right to information was basically a product of civil society organizations arising in Rajasthan, so on and so forth. So there have been also major failure, like Narmada was a major failure in spite of